Now, for those of you who may not have been keeping up with it, last night was the hour-long series finale of the show Star Wars Resistance. And I have to say, it was actually a pretty good episode, easily the best in its entire 2-year run, which is of course kind of the problem. It was easily the best episode of the entire series, because the entire series was, well, not very good. And yeah, I know some of you take exception every time I criticize this show and respond by saying it's for kids, as if that excuses it from having to meet a certain level of quality, as if kids can't recognize or won't care when a show is bad, and will just watch it anyway. Even though I'd argue a lot of kids were not impressed by Resistance and weren't watching it, nor were many older Star Wars fans to be honest, or it would have lasted longer than 2 seasons. And yes, I also know that Lucasfilm said or claims that the plan all along was for the show to be just 2 seasons long, which could be true, I guess. I mean, why would they want a long run out of a show that's set in the exact same time period as the new theme park or area in a theme park that just opened up last year, which is of course Galaxy's Edge? And I'm sure the toys associated with the show becoming instant peg warmers that neither kids nor collectors had any interest in, thus prompting Hasbro to announce they were making only one wave of figures and were then done, was also always part of the plan too, because it's not like toy sales is where the real money is made from a kids show, or like they cared about recouping all their costs from developing and creating the show. But seriously here, whether or not this was meant to be 2 seasons or many more, let me now give you my brief thoughts on Season 2 of Star Wars Resistance. And I was going to do a full breakdown of the season, but honestly, I'm not sure how many of you out there really care, which is of course again the problem. And look, before I go on, if you're someone who loved this show, that's great, that's fine. I'm happy you enjoyed it, and you clearly saw something in it that I did not. We're all entitled to our own opinions, and I'm just going to give you mine. Okay, so to give my brief thoughts on Season 2, and pretty much the whole show in general, before then talking about the future of Star Wars animation and what they should and likely will do next. Overall, in some ways I thought Season 2 was better than Season 1. It was certainly a bit more exciting and adventure-oriented. It felt like we got a lot more action, and were definitely taken to many, many more settings and planets, which made it feel more like a Star Wars show in that respect. Yet, at the same time, that made it feel almost too meandering and pointless. The first season actually felt far more focused and purposeful than this one did, because the whole second season was all about being chased by the First Order and trying to find resources to be able to just survive with minimal intriguing character development along the way to really make me care if they survived or not. And there's very little tension every time the First Order does catch up with them, which is quite frequently. It actually feels like it happens every other episode. There's just this one Star Destroyer relentlessly chasing after them, because I guess they have nothing better to do at the time. And when they do catch up with the Colossus, they usually launch like a dozen TIE fighters, or less, and they then get easily picked off by the ace pilots without them ever taking a single loss. Though at least finally in the last episode here, the First Order decides to launch dozens upon dozens of TIE fighters, but it ends up not mattering because the aces still don't take any losses, even when facing like 10 to 1 odds. Though one of the aces in the show even says each one of them is worth like 10 TIE pilots. And they end up blowing up this Star Destroyer at the end of the episode, though they did have help from within because the shields were taken down by those aboard the ship. And though I'm not saying that I think the show should have slowly picked off the aces one by one as the season went on, I never felt like any of them were ever in real danger or might be killed. There was just never any tension whatsoever in the show from start to finish. There wasn't a single instance the whole time, both seasons, where I truly feared for any of our heroes. Not that I really would have been hit emotionally if they died, which is maybe the real problem. And again, I'm not saying they needed to be killing characters off left and right, or that they even needed to kill any of them per se, but then at least find other ways for them to fail, and for that failure to bring about real consequences for themselves or others, or real change or character growth would have been nice too. And before you come at me again about this being a kids show, let me just direct you to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I watched for the first time about a year ago now. And let me just say I rest my case, because that's how good a cartoon can truly be. Anyway, maybe one of the most disappointing things about Resistance is it actually has very little to do with the Resistance. I mean, Season 2 here takes place between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, yet it does absolutely nothing with that potential. It does nothing to tie itself into The Rise of Skywalker or even the previous movie. In fact, in the trailer for Season 2, we got a glimpse of Kylo Ren, and it seems like he's totally vested in finding the Colossus, which is the name of their space station slash ship slash home, if you're wondering, and that he's going to be showing up from time to time, and that the stakes are really going to be raised in this season. And I remember reading at the time how excited some people were about that being the case, that they thought things were about to get real good. But that scene with Kylo Ren from the trailer literally is taken from the last 5 minutes of this final episode and lasted a whole 10 seconds or so. And it was just the whole, "I'm disappointed in your failure and I'm going to force choke you now" trope. And that's all we got of him the whole damn season. And no, I'm not saying that more Kylo Ren would have saved the season or made it incredible, but at least it would have helped tie it to the bigger picture somewhat, maybe? And that's the real problem. Nothing they ended up doing in this show is relevant to the bigger picture. This does not enhance your enjoyment or understanding of the sequel trilogy in the least, nor is it just very good and intriguing in its own right. It ends up laughable when you compare it to something like The Clone Wars, which does so much for the prequel trilogy time period, not to mention, it's also just a fantastic show in its own right. Even Rebels, though it starts out a bit slow perhaps, ultimately finds a way to make itself relevant to the bigger picture, and to really tie into the larger story of Star Wars. Not to mention, the characters again there are just more interesting in that show than here in Resistance. Plus, you have a Jedi in Rebels, and no sort of Force users in Resistance at all. Which is a really odd choice to make for a show more geared towards the younger crowd. And no, after defending kids before, I'm not going to turn around and say they only watch something if you put flashy and cool things in it, like Jedi. But let's be real here, it does help. And not just with the younger crowd, but with the older crowd too. For a lot of people, Star Wars is the Force and Jedi and all of that. And so, they just kind of hamstrung themselves by not including that at all. And a simple fix to make the show instantly have more appeal is to have it where Kaz, that's our main character, was not just some random clumsy pilot, but that he was force sensitive, or that it was just awakened in him too, because an awakening is actually some extremely rare galaxy-wide event. And so maybe you start him out a bit clumsy in Season 1, like they did, but then in Season 2, after he's been awakened at the very end of the first season, he soon starts to realize something's up with him, and he begins to believe he's supposed to be a Jedi, and he tries to become one on his own, which obviously isn't going to work. And you can keep everything else with the Colossus being chased by the First Order more or less the same. But in the final episode of the season, he and everyone else learns about what happened on Crate with Luke Skywalker, and thus this inspires them, or most of them, to want to fight for the Resistance, and Kaz wants to find Rey, who he hears called the Last Jedi, so that she can train him. And then Season 3 is all about them trying to hunt down Rey and the Resistance, or something like that. I don't know. I realize how similar this is to what's been done before, but I feel like Resistance was watered down Star Wars, and like more certainly could have been done with it, even if it had to use a tried and true formula. But anyway here, Resistance is done and over with, and it's time to look ahead at what's next for Star Wars animation, which technically is Season 7 of The Clone Wars, which starts airing on Disney Plus in less than a month. And though I'm absolutely thrilled to be getting that, let's look beyond that for a moment and ask, what should they do after that? And most likely, whatever that is already long since in production, and has been since whenever work on Resistance officially came to an end, and probably even before that to some extent. Because I do think they realized early on that Resistance was going to be a dud, and wanted to wrap it up quickly to start working on something else, even though they claim that was the plan all along. And I also think they'd never abandon Star Wars animation, not when they know the potential it holds, and how beloved the Clone Wars was, and even Rebels was, though to a lesser extent, much beloved by the fans. Animated shows are a great way to get the younger crowd into Star Wars when they're done right, and to keep your older fanbase happy too. Anyway, right now the rumor is that Star Wars Rebels will be continuing next winter or late this year, and we'll be picking up with Ahsoka and Sabine's search for Ezra, which is how the show Rebels of course ended, with those two heading off together to find him, and I'm sure Thrawn will be a part of this as well. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not called Rebels Season 5, because that show did actually have a very definitive end, even though there is certainly more to the story to be explored. Plus, by this time, the Galactic Civil War is over, and they're not rebels anymore, so I think you just call it something different entirely at this point. Either way, that is what's rumored to be coming next, and quite honestly, I think it's 100% true, because such a series would make perfect sense for multiple reasons. For one, a lot of people are really interested to know what happens next, what happens with Sabine and Ahsoka during their hunt for Ezra. It was a hell of a way to end the show that left most of us fans, myself included, certainly wanting more. For another reason, it once again brings back Ahsoka, easily one of the most beloved characters within the core fanbase, and maybe, hopefully, beyond it one day. And it'll bring her back shortly after she'll be a huge part of the upcoming Season 7 of The Clone Wars, where some, mostly younger fans I'd imagine, may be meeting this character for the very first time. And so I won't be surprised in the least when an announcement is made or a teaser trailer drops for this new show while Season 7 of The Clone Wars is airing, or right after it ends, or even before it starts, I guess. One way or another, Disney and Lucasfilm have to be looking for ways to capitalize off Season 7 of The Clone Wars to keep people subscribed to Disney Plus, and promising more from the star character of this upcoming season, keeping in mind 2 of the 3 story arcs we'll be getting heavily involve Ahsoka, is probably the perfect way to do it, because people may then be tempted to go back to watch or rewatch Rebels and the previous seasons of Clone Wars. Also, let's not forget this show would take place in roughly the same time period as The Mandalorian, which means possible loose crossover at some point. We could either see Sabine, who is a Mandalorian herself of course, or even Ahsoka appear in The Mandalorian, or even The Mandalorian showing up in the animated show. There are a ton of possibilities there. There's also a possibility to have Ahsoka and Luke Skywalker meet in such a show. Basically, a series that's a continuation of Rebels makes so much sense for so many reasons. I'd actually be stunned if this isn't what we get next, and if it doesn't come out relatively soon, like by the end of this year, which is rumored. Because right now, until we get a new movie in roughly 3 years, for Star Wars, it's all about selling Disney Plus and then keeping people subscribed, and a new animated show involving Ahsoka Tano is one of the best ways to do that. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me if you watched Resistance and what you thought of it. Also, what would you like to see the next animated Star Wars show be about? Do you believe the rumors about Rebels continuing? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.